The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
All right, and welcome back to another week of Midwest Swing Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Berardino, along with co-founder Tom Schreier and Eric Foster at the controls. How you doing, guys?
Doing well.
Doing well. Thanks, Mike.
Good. Just a reminder that we are part of the Zone Coverage Podcast Network, and you can subscribe to this fine podcast via iTunes, Spotify, or any of your favorite podcast apps. We ask you to please leave a review and feel free to check out earlier episodes, which have included guests such as Jerry Krasnick, Trevor Plouffe, Gene Glynn, the great Wayne Hathaway, Dr. Ricky Cobb of Super 70 Sports, and this man, the first guest we are having back since the rebooting of Midwest Swing Podcast, and that is the most interesting man in the scouting world. Welcome back to Kimball Crossley.
Thanks, Mike, and glad to be back.
Oh, yes. Well, we promised at the time. The show was so much fun that we did back in September after the Toronto Blue Jays informed you that you would be a free agent this winter, along with Manny Machado and Bryce Harper and so many others, Brian Dozier. But the difference is we get to talk to you during your free agency period here and really get some insights on the postseason. And one of the things that I was remiss last time and we did not get into is some of your thoughts on the Minnesota Twins, individual players, and maybe even who the next manager could or should be. But first thing is, you were published. Congratulations. We had a chance to see your work in the Boston Globe or bostonglobe.com the other day. And as a man who lives in the Boston area and grew up in the Northeast, what was that like for you?
No, it was good. I mean, I had been a journalist before, as we discussed in the last podcast, and after 20 years of scouting, I'm looking for a scouting job, but I'm also keeping my the doors open to maybe a return to media, especially if I don't find anything in the scouting world. So I've been doing some freelance writing, and I wrote a little a Scouts Take preview of the upcoming ALCS between Boston and Houston. And I was glad it ran in the Globe because, I guess I was about to say, before I was a scout as a journalist, I had some success, but I don't think I ever got a byline in the Globe or Globe.com before. So that was a thrill.
Yes, and you had a lot of things to say about the ALCS. Obviously, just a dream matchup between the Astros and the Red Sox, and tied at 1. Game 3 will come on Tuesday down in Houston. Nathan Eovaldi versus Dallas Keuchel. Game 3 of the NLCS will be tonight as we tape this at Dodger Stadium. Ulysses Chassin against Walker Buehler. But let's hone in on that ALCS since that's what you previewed for the Boston Globe. David Price, I'll just quote from your scouting report going into it, and we'll see how you felt it matched up. You said of David Price, his stuff is no longer what it was, and he finds himself trying to learn how to be a finesse pitcher instead of a power pitcher while under tremendous scrutiny from the Red Sox fan base and media. Confidence and faith in his stuff and command are vital to the finesse pitcher, which is why Price can blow hot and cold on any given night. He can no longer rear back and throw 97 to get himself out of a jam as he did in his prime. So obviously he made it into the 5th, but that was not the dominant David Price. And of course, they're still looking for a postseason win. Not that that matters so much, but what did you make of David Price's performance?
Yeah, it's really interesting. One of the interesting reactions was that people were happy with his performance in some ways, getting into the 5th. And I'm surprised that that is the standard now for David Price. I mean, that might be the standard for the spot starter or, say, a Wade Miley who, has had a rough career getting the Brewers, pitching a good game for the Brewers. But David Price, and, that's strange to hear. And part of that is the bizarre phenomenon that happens when a pitcher pitches and his offense, especially in the American League, he has nothing to do with what his offense does. But because the score might have been 5-4 when he leaves the game, well, now he's pitched well. He's left with the lead. Well, if the offense had 0 runs, we're like, oh my God, here we're getting beat again. And this guy gave up 4 runs and 4 2/3 with 4 walks and 5 hits. I mean, it's not a good outing. That said, I feel bad for Price because he does try and compete. It's just his delivery, his stuff is not really conducive to being finessey. And he's tried to work in his changeup more. And I think, talking about confidence, I think he didn't have a lot of confidence in his changeup. So he was going at them with fastballs. And, there was some success. In many ways, I know it sounds strange to say because he gave up 4 walks, but I thought he was kind of pitching aggressively. He wasn't afraid to pitch in to a lot of the dangerous Houston hitters. But because of his limited arsenal and their selectivity, they got to him. And, he gave up the big home run as he often does because he's kind of a high fastball pitcher. And, it was not a great performance. It was very interesting that he did almost get his first win in a game where he didn't pitch well. And I think Alex Cora probably made the right decision to take him out, especially with the matchup he was faced with Gonsalves, had already hit a home run off him. But boy, if you're Cora, you've got to be tempted. And it's not just for like the soft factors of, pitcher 5 innings, get a win, but knowing that Price has this monkey on his back about never having a postseason win. And you almost think, gosh, you get him 1/3 of an inning more and you get him a W, and maybe he just relaxes more and pitches better in, 5 days or down the line. So it was a fascinating, outing in that regard.
So you're suggesting, generally, typical run-of-the-mill game, it would be foolish to manage to the win. We think we all reached that point in our understanding of the game. But do you think there might have been some sort of exponential effect, or at least getting David Price over that mental hurdle, at least taking away that line of questioning that he has to deflect every time he comes in on the day before a postseason start? And as you say, it is a rabid media right there in Boston. And of course, the postseason media really grows. You might, if you were in Alex Cora's shoes, you might have managed to the win in that spot. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, which again surprised me because I hate managers doing that. I thought one of the great moments in baseball playoff history was when Joe Torre pulled David Cohn in a World Series, even though he had gone 4 2/3. And this was before pitchers got an early hook in the playoffs. And I just thought, wow, that was really bold. I mean, and gutsy. And I thought one of Torre's strengths with those great Yankee teams is he did not sit back. He was managing egos, and he made gutsy decisions during that great run the Yankees had.
Talking with Kimball Crossley, a longtime baseball scout, professional scout for the Dodgers, the Astros, the Blue Jays for the last decade and a half, and he's kind enough to share some of his thoughts here on the postseason, a fascinating Final Four of teams. But let's talk about Game 1 of the ALCS, though, because you also really broke down Verlander versus Sale, in a way that only a scout can. BostonGlobe.com readers got to see it. But let's talk about what played out, because now Justin Verlander was pulled with a 3-2 lead after 6 innings and 90 pitches, and that it worked out for the Astros because they did add on in the ninth. But how did that moment strike you? A.J. Hinch seems like a really cerebral manager, seems to check all the boxes, but Verlander could not have enjoyed that.
Well, it's interesting. I think Verlander probably knows he didn't have his best, not so much stuff, but command that night. Watching that game, I thought Verlander pitched behind a lot to some dangerous hitters and got away with some behind in the count fastballs that were not where he wanted them. And it was he really got lucky. If you notice, sometimes fans should watch where the catcher sets up. And I know that that might be an obvious thing to a lot of people, but fans are busy watching for the batter to do something, whatever, and you don't always see where the catcher sets up and puts his glove. And it was very interesting. So many times 2-0 Verlander would catcher setting up low and away from the lefty, and his fastball rode right back in, but it rode in enough to be on the inside corner. And I was like, dang, he's getting lucky. Like that's a mistake he made, but he didn't pay for it. And that's the beauty of baseball, right? Is like, you don't pay for every mistake. It takes two to tango, and you can really throw a great pitch, but then the hitter's guessing right or wrong, and vice versa. And so I thought it was a good move at that time, because I did not think Verlander was especially sharp. I thought he was kind of like overthrowing a little bit or something. His command was not that good. As one of the great things about him is he throws hard with plus command, and that's a rare combination.
And of course, they turn it over then to old Twins favorite, well-known commodity Ryan Pressly, who's just completely taken that step forward with the Astros that Twins fans kept waiting for and kept waiting. Although his swing and miss rate had climbed in recent years, and we knew that. We kept talking about it on Twitter and in print, that his spin rate was elite with the curveball, the slider, and the fastball. And it was one of the mysteries of recent Twins seasons why Ryan Pressly wasn't just launching himself into a closer role, for instance. They had opportunities. He never really even was auditioned for that. Then he's traded for multiple pieces that are in the minors. Nobody higher than AA. Alcala actually had a lat strain. He was the highest, the most advanced player in that deal. But what do you think of Ryan Pressly as a weapon for A.J. Hinch right now, and where could his career go from here?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that, because I'm a scout. I was a scout, and scouts have different coverage. And it's funny, you're so busy seeing teams in your coverage, you don't always see other teams. But a few years ago, the Twins came into Fenway, and I saw them. I think it was when they came in. I've seen the Twins a little bit outside of my coverage. And one of the guys that really impressed me was Pressly. And I was like, ooh, this is a good arm. And I think the year I saw him was a year that they just had an atrocious pen. And I thought, well, this is a bright spot in this pen. Why isn't this guy kind of like the key guy? And I was impressed with them, with things you're talking about, like power and the ability to spin a breaking ball. And so I was like, okay, this guy has all the makings of, a late game pitcher. So I'd ask you though, like, I didn't really see him this year. Is he, like people always say with the Astros, they've modified his repertoire. They picked out certain pitches that he works well for him. And I just think, really? I mean, that sounds so simple. You don't think a pitcher's struggling in your own system, and you say like, boy, your curveball's pretty good. Hey, let's throw that thing more. Like it seems like sort of obvious, but they're onto something, obviously. Have you seen a difference? You've seen so much of him in his arsenal since he got to Houston and how he's using it.
Yes, and the percentage of curveballs thrown spiked, maybe tripled once he got there. And I know for a fact, because Paul Molitor would talk about it, and Neil Allen talked about it, and Garvin Alston talked about it as pitching coaches. They wanted him to throw more curveballs. He didn't trust it as much, didn't have maybe the feel for it for some reason. As a Twin, he loved that slider. He loves the power aspect. He loved that he could run it up there at 97 with a four-seamer, and he loved being able to throw a 91-mile-an-hour slider that sometimes would flatten out. But that curve in the variance between the fastball and the curve has made him just about impossible to hit right now. And the only thing lacking for him to be a closer, seems to me, is opportunity and then confidence. And he lacked confidence at times because his fastball, when as many guys have it, thrown at the top velocity, will flatten out. He got hit. He gave up some home runs, some opposite field, shots where he just found barrels. Ryan Pressly seemed to find a lot of barrels with that fastball, but all the other boxes were checked, and it was just a matter. I'm not surprised at all that he's made this jump forward, and I do think it's a mistake for the narrative to be, why didn't the Twins ever ask him to throw more curveballs? Because no doubt Jeremy Hefner in their advanced scouting side was doing so, and the people in uniform as well. Another thing that's let me just interject on that. Yeah,
Mike, while you're talking about that, let me just interject on that, because that's like one of the fascinating things about baseball over the years is it's uncanny how much when a guy goes to another team and has success, we look back on his old team and we go, well, they must have screwed up and the new team succeeded. But part of that is it's uncanny how players, especially when they come up in an organization and they heard something from the organization for a long time, they get stubborn and they're like, oh, I'm sick of hearing that. And then all of a sudden they go to another organization and now they hear it from new voices that had, that are objective or like didn't know them from Adam. And now they go, oh, they're saying this too. Maybe there's some truth to that. And it's almost like you can't help it. Like until you trade the guy or waive him or release him, there's no way. You just say like, too bad you can't work out a deal with another team and say, all right, I'll take your stubborn guy and you take mine, and we'll at least benefit from the second voice saying the same thing.
I think you just hit on what change of scenery deals are at root. I think it's just changing the messenger a lot of times. I mean, everybody has the same data points. Everybody has the same video. Everybody largely has the same philosophies these days. I mean, there's some differences here and there, but there's no special sauce. But yes, the Astros came at him as reigning champions. Brent Strom, different voice as the pitching coach, and then he's back in Texas for whatever that's worth. Maybe he's not from Houston, he's from outside of Dallas, but just maybe closer to family. Who knows? Whatever, it worked out for him in the last couple of months, and now he's a huge weapon for him. Now, Bill James is a great follow on Twitter, of course, and just, Hall of Fame worthy in my estimation, I think in yours too. And I don't even think we're having this conversation about baseball here at Midwest Swing Podcast without having read Bill James through the years. But what do you think of some of the stuff that he puts on Twitter? Well, maybe that's too broad. Let's talk about what he put out there, which was really helpful. And I want to ask you about it from a scouting perspective, talking to Kimball Crossley, longtime professional scout, journalist, actor, director, coach, the most interesting man in the scouting world. So Bill James tweets some real knowledge the other day. It was about the way Alex Cora set up his lineup and ignored, I believe, a fairly small sample size of batter-pitcher matchup numbers. And so Bill, who still works for the Red Sox, right? He still works for him. He's pretty open with his thoughts. He says, right? Mm-hmm. He says,
I don't know if that's accurate. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Is he not working for them at all?
I don't know. I don't know if he is. It's pretty. I mean, I don't think he's got a.
He's been marginalized. I don't think there's any doubt he's been marginalized. Yeah. But I know some people in the Red Sox scouting side, and he still comes to the organization meetings. He's still on call basically for Dave Dombrowski.
Okay.
How much say he really had? I mean, he still goes to the winter meetings as a Red Sox employee. Sits in the room. It's one of the more fascinating things that you could have Bill James in your employ, that since you hired him, you won 3 world championships and have been on the doorstep other times. And then somehow he's not consulted before everything you do. I don't get that. But anyway, he talked about the batter-pitcher matchup. And he said, really glad we're having this discussion on Twitter. This is Bill James. I have been frustrated for years by the inability of our community to get to the larger baseball community to understand that batter versus pitcher matchups are not meaningful. If we make a little bit of progress here, that's great. He goes on and says, randomizing elements internal to the batter-pitcher confrontation would take hundreds of trials to stabilize. And he adds also, there's a vast universe of things that we do not understand. Sabermetrics has not explained 99% of the baseball world. We have explained much less than 1%. Searching random data, looking for tiny advantages is a waste of resources. So, having sat in these meetings, your bigger picture, I understand as a scout, you're not setting the pregame plan or the pitch approach for the starter and the catcher, but what is a large enough sample size for you as you sit there behind home plate or analyze statistics to become meaningful in batter-pitcher matchups and setting a lineup?
Well, I read that same tweet, and I do, and believe me, I'm a big believer in Bill James, and I wouldn't be here if it weren't for him. But he, I think he's wrong about this, and now he's right in the sense that people obsess about it, and they look at small samples just like they do with all sorts of baseball numbers, and it's just like, oh my gosh, throw that statistic out the window. Especially when they say like, he's hitting 500 against him lifetime. He's 3 for 6. I'm like, that's amazing. And like people just use this stuff. So I almost think he was overstating it because of that. Because it is so overused, the batter-pitcher matchups. But I do disagree in that there's no question that certain batter styles and hitter styles match up. I mean, first of all, if nothing else, I'd say to him, platoon splits, Bill. So much of your career is made on platoon splits. So you already agree that certain guys are better versus righties and lefties. Well, guess what? Some of these individual matchups are good because he's a lefty and he's a righty, you know. And then he also did a dive into, you know, whether ground ball pitchers and fly ball pitchers, opposites attract, the same way with the platoon splits for lefties and righties. So again, now it's like, well, if you believe it with ground ball and fly ball, well, that's part of why some guys succeed against certain guys. They're fly ball, you know, they're up in the zone hitters as opposed to down the zone hitters. And so then when you start combining these traits, especially where they command the ball, in, out, up, down, hard, soft, I do think you can look at matchups and go, that's a good matchup for them. I want him facing him. Now, if you do it, and you do it like, I guess what he's trying to say, the stat people might just be obsessing about every time they see 7 for 12, they're going to jump on it and not even do a deeper dive and say, well, what is that a phenomenon that's real? Were they 4 squib hits? You know, what's really going on? But that's where if I'm a manager, I'm going to look at that data and like everything else I do in baseball, I say, does it jibe with what I see with my eyes? Does it make sense to me? Okay, he's 7 for 12, but do I think that's a fluke or a fact? And so I think they can be useful, just like everything else, if you use them with other ideas in mind and with other parts of your brain and knowledge working. So I was surprised that he said that, and it made me think, but I do disagree with him on the larger picture. And I don't know what else. I think it's a beautiful thing to study. In fact, that's a great thing to study. I don't know what else we'd be studying about that.
It makes me think of, I believe Torey Lovullo gave an interview when he was still with the Red Sox to David Larillo at Fangraphs, and David's great and asked the exact questions a lot of times we all have of people in uniform, and he asked about sample size. When does it become meaningful? And Torey Lovullo had maybe the lowest number I'd ever heard. He said maybe 20. At 20 and beyond, maybe now you're onto something. And then I've heard others say maybe more sabermetrically, it needs to be at least 50. But Bill's suggesting almost like an entire season's worth of confrontations is meaningless because that worm will turn eventually, whatever. I wonder about the confidence side. We talked about confidence with Ryan Pressly. You can't have a conversation about professional athletes, really amateurs too, without confidence. These guys know what their numbers are. They know if they're 0 for 13 against somebody. They know if they're 0 for 7. They know if they're, like you say, 7 for 12. Stick with that. Is the fact that the hitter then steps into the box knowing he's 7 for 12 against that night's starter, does that mean anything in the overall and what could happen?
Well, see, those are the soft factors that I love to play with that I would almost rule out, because I would say there's that confidence factor, but now the pitcher's looking at the same number, and there's the bear down factor. Oh, I've really had my troubles with Eric Kratz, and I know he's really not that good, so let me just not hang him a breaking ball this time because the guy's 7 for 12 against me. And so I think you could make an equal sort of soft factor argument, and that's where, again, I'm trying to, when you look at those numbers, you say, well, why? And so I guess one of the biggest things I think about with all data in sports is, okay, that's what happened. That's the phenomenon. Is it repeatable? Is there something in this number that makes me think, oh, that's going to continue to be the way, and I can trust that? Because that's really what we're talking about. He's 7 for 12. Does that mean he's likely to go 7 for his next 12, or at least hit well? Or is it just like, no, it's a fluke? Because sometimes I think, like, when I hear one of these stats, like, oh, they've won 12 in a row at home, I'd be like, uh-oh, I think that's going to, there's going to be correction there. Like it would scare me. There was some number that they were throwing around on a broadcast, and I was thinking, well, uh-oh, I would think the opposite now for that team. whether it's especially runners in scoring position, like classic. If in a series you're 0 for 12 in runners in scoring position after 2 or 3 games, I'm like, good. Then that's a good sign that we're not going to go 0 for 47. You know what I mean? And that's a stat that I think is pretty much, we see like no team has had the magic bullet when it comes to either being successful or holding down the other team in scoring position situations. I mean, good luck with that. It just, that's nonsense.
So yeah, regression to the mean or progression to the mean.
Right.
These things tend to normalize whether you're at a roulette table or a blackjack table or you're watching baseball. I want to seeing Jackie Bradley Jr. Hit a bases clearing double last night. Give the post game interview. I thought of Byron Buxton, and I want to ask you. And this is a podcast that where so many of our listeners are in the Minnesota area. We're everywhere at the Zone Coverage Podcast Network. This is Midwest Swing Pod. I'm your host, Mike Berardino. We're talking to Kimball Crossley, a longtime professional scout. But seeing Jackie Bradley, I'm going to throw some numbers at you here, some meaningful ones, I hope. But strikes me that there's no reason, maybe it's time to lower the bar. When Byron Buxton was coming through the system, he was always going to be known for being taken one spot behind Carlos Correa in the draft, or that he had at Cedar Rapids a very similar season to that Mike Trout had at Cedar Rapids when they were an Angels affiliate. Maybe it's time to just lower the sights a little bit and say, if you're the Minnesota Twins, just get Byron Buxton to be Jackie Bradley Jr. And I think there's a real comp here, and I don't know if that's good enough for people, but I think Jackie Bradley's got a chance here to help a champion. Byron will be 25 in December. Bradley is 28. Jackie Bradley Jr.'s career slash line is 238, 317, 407. Byron Buxton's is 230, 285, 387. Now, Bradley has more plate appearances, but not that many more. Buxton has a career OPS of 672 and OPS plus adjusted for park and league of 80, 20% below average. Jackie Bradley's at 724, so about 50 points higher. 93 OPS plus, which is a little surprising considering it's in a great ballpark, you would think, for hitters. So substantially better in adjusted OPS. Now, the peak for Jackie Bradley was the half season in 15, where I guess he got hurt, and then 16, a full year. He had a season and a half where his OPS got up to 832, 835 both years, and he was 119 and 118 OPS plus. Byron Buxton, and he was a 5.5 WAR player in 2016, according to Baseball Reference WAR, because he's so good defensively. And we've seen it. I mean, he's the only guy out there really who can make Buxton type plays to me. Maybe Red Sox fans would say Buxton's making Bradley type plays. Buxton, his peak was 2017, which was a disjointed. See, the whole career has been disjointed, but his peak was 728 OPS or 728 OPS and 93 OPS plus, but he was still a 5.2 WAR player, so it's a negligible difference. Buxton at his best was Bradley-like. Fair comparison and a fair bar going forward for Byron Buxton. Can he at least be Jackie Bradley Jr. if healthy?
Well, I think it's a fair comparison, but even more important, it's a great point. And I figured we'd talk about Buxton in this call, and I'm a Buxton believer to a degree, and I'm like, yeah, my next team that I work for, I'm going to be like, hey, let's go to the Twins and offer them J.R. Murphy for Byron Buxton, because I'm like, is this not Aaron Hicks all over again? I mean, we have this young stud, high pedigree guy that struggled in his initial major league, appearances, even if it's a couple of years. We lose our patience. And with great athletes, look at Lorenzo Cain in Milwaukee. You have to realize part of scouting is going like, well, he's more likely to figure it out than a guy who has fewer tools. And even though it's frustrating that he hasn't put it together and he hasn't achieved what we thought, he still has a chance to figure it out. And what you're saying, the great point is, it's not like it seems like he's been terrible or a bust, but yeah, there you have a guy that's been on some very good teams and a central part of them who hasn't played much better at an older age. So absolutely. I mean, I think, Buxton is a guy you've got to keep trying. You've got to, like, whether you're the Twins or somebody else, you've got to give chances to. I'm not quite sure why he's struggled so much. Of course, we all thought he had figured it out second half of 2017. The baseball insight thing I can give you is despite his great tools, I've always thought there was a lot of length to that swing. Now, length doesn't mean you can't still be good. There's good players that have length, and Jackie Bradley's swing is a little long, which is one of the reasons he's struggled. But it's harder for a right-handed hitter. And so to get around your swing, you have to do some things. And there's a good example in Derek Jeter might be the classic example. Derek Jeter sort of had this relatively long inside-out swing, but he used the opposite field so well. He didn't overreact to getting pitched inside. He was smart enough to keep you honest in. And I think a lot of young players who have a long swing, they come out of their game. They overreact to when they're getting jammed. They don't use the whole field. They become too pull conscious when they do have some power. And Ahmed Rosario of the Mets is a very similar example to Jeter and Buxton in that regard. And they've got to figure it out. And I would stick with Buxton for a lot of those reasons and be optimistic about his future. Especially, I've heard pretty good things about his makeup, although now obviously there's concerns with what went down at the end of the season and is not being promoted.
No, I can attest, Kimball, I've said this, I've had other scouts ask me just in the last few months. The entire industry is watching how this Buxton thing plays out and whether he might be made available in a change of scenery type deal. I would not be shocked if he were traded for a pitcher who hadn't totally reached his potential yet, obviously, a similar stage kind of disappointment. But Byron Buxton is the most accountable, responsible, right there with any player I've ever covered in any sport, and really wants to share the achievements with his teammates. When things are really going well, that's when you find out. If you learn about people when things are going badly, of course, but when they're really going well, do they love them some Byron Buxton, or do they share it with the teammates? And when he was winning games and hitting inside the park homers and having 5-hit games in 2017 as they made a push for the postseason, I love the way he would involve his teammates and use the media spotlight to point out what others were doing. That outfield is very close. Rosario and Kepler on either side. He talked about the brotherhood there. The way he throws himself into walls, even when he was hitting 180. I did a story in June at twincities.com, even then, and when he was on the DL, about why he insists on playing that way, all out, never pulls up shy of a wall. He really just a complete professional and complete all-in kind of guy. I'm with you. I still think it can happen. He's got to stay healthy. He needs a little bit of luck. He needs that season of 500 to 600 plate appearances to sort it all out. And I'll tell you what else he needs. He needs the tinkering to stop. He's got a lot of good voices around him and a lot of excellent hitting coaches have had their hands on him, but it's almost like if ever there's been a hitter overcoached, it's Byron Buxton. Just let the talent flow. Let's see where it takes him. And yes, if a team can get him in a deal for a piece that would have been unthinkable, or 3 pieces that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago, they should do it. Here's another tweet that jumped out at me just this morning. What do you think? And I don't know if this is anything that strikes you the way it struck me, but the Angels, Kimball, talking with Kimball Crossley, longtime professional baseball scout, the Angels aren't just interviewing managerial candidates to follow Mike Scioscia, which is a tough enough job in itself, considering the tenure he had and the championship he won long ago. The Angels, according to Morosi, are administering 2-hour written tests to managerial candidates with questions spanning analytical, interpersonal, and game management aspects of the job. It's a sign of the rigor involved in the position across MLB. There are 6 managerial openings now. If you were the GM of a team, would you give written exams to your managerial candidates? Do you think there's any benefit to that, or is that just silly?
It's hard. I can't say if the written part depends the context with which it's offered. Depends exactly what questions. I was going to say, I would ask many of those same questions in an interview. And especially in this day and age, I would not be afraid to say, like, listen, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? I mean, you're going to be spending a lot of time together, and you don't want to be surprised when the guy says, like, I don't believe in the double switch ever. Like, what? Not that would happen.
Well, why does it have to be written? Why written? I don't understand.
So what I was going to say is this with the written part. Maybe the written part is more welcomed by some guys because they're like, look, it's, don't assault me with a million questions in a 2-hour interview. Like, hey, hand me the written thing. Let me mull questions over, think about them. Maybe it's easier. Maybe the manager candidate would be like, oh, I'll welcome just, the 2-hour written interview questions instead of like in a more exhausting in-person interview. I don't know. It's a good question, but I would say the stakes are so high that, I can't put it past the club. Like, hey, if you feel like you need to do your homework, and if you turn off guys with that, then they're probably the kind of guys that you would have turned off later when you gave them a stack of data to look at. You know what I mean? It's like, okay,
well,
this is not for me.
I think back to the hiring of Terry Francona, which worked as the Red Sox, worked out very well. I remember Francona talking at his first spring training with the Red Sox, 04, and talking about how Theo Epstein and other front office members of the Red Sox, you probably remember this, sat down with him and watched a tape of a game, maybe a random game, and he kind of managed it with them sitting there, or shared his thoughts as though they were right there in the dugout with him. And it was a game in which Keith Foulke was available to him, and he had to let them know at what point he would have had Keith Foulke in the game, and he got plenty of chances to use Keith Foulke later. But that might seem to me, especially if you give him some breakdowns and whatever, let him just kind of prepare for a game-like situation. Although it'll never be as game-like as the actual game, because you can't simulate that. I remember Jack McKeon saying to us back in 2003 in a Marlin media group, and Jack was great at deflecting BS questions. But one of the things he would do is turn the question back to you after a game. If you're going to press him on a move or a non-move, what would you have done? And if you even said, he said, too late. And you know what? He was right. That is what managing is. You do not have time for, you're not running around and calling 30-second timeouts. I guess you could pretend to be challenging a call or something, but you have to make snap decisions. And I have so much respect for the people who sit in that chair. Forget the pre and post game in front of the media. Forget all the interpersonal stuff that you have to do with players, and make sure that their heads are in the right places, and that your staff is able to lift those who need to be lifted, or pull people down a peg if they're feeling too good about themselves. Whatever. Just the moves, the hundreds, if not thousands of moves, or little tiny decisions made. Do we get this guy up now? You're not going to get the guy up 3 times in the game, et cetera, et cetera. So the written part of it, there's no written portion of managing a major league game. So that's why I do think you have to be quick on your feet, and is too late. This has been a lot of fun, Kimball. Of course, you're welcome back anytime. We love doing this. This is Kimball Crossley joining us. Longtime professional scout. I guess we have a couple minutes left. I'd ask you because, like I said, we'd like to hear any of your thoughts about the Twins' younger pieces as they try to determine the staying power of a lot of people. Got auditions this year in a disappointing season, especially late in the year. I believe you've seen some, say, Stephen Gonsalves or Zach Littell or Cole Stewart. Those guys pop to mind. Do you have any thoughts, or did you see them at all this year?
Well, the guys that when I think about your organization, the Twins organization, I should say, that come to mind are like, okay, Buxton would interest me. Kepler, who sort of kind of had, I guess, sort of a down year. I still have a positive memory of looking at him going, wow, I think that guy's going to be a really good hitter. So I'm high on Kepler. But I did see Rochester a few games this year, and the guys I saw that really stuck out were, and boy, they have tough names to pronounce. So it's Gonsalves and Busenitz, right? Or maybe I'm messing up the name.
Busenitz, and we love out. Yeah, it's got about 10 different versions, but Busenitz, I think he'll be available this offseason. I like. Well,
I'm a Busenitz believer.
Really?
And I saw him in AAA, and he threw strikes with plus stuff for me, and I'm surprised he's had so little success in Major League, and he's had such control issues, because I didn't think he was that far from being able to throw quality strikes consistently.
He's the next Ryan Presley out the door potentially.
Well, he is. I was going to mention. Yeah. I was going to mention him, and so and I saw, but I did see Gonsalves, and I was fascinated because I knew that he had been a high prospect and had dominant minor league numbers at times. Well, I was so surprised that his stuff is far from dominant. I mean, now that he's pitching the big league level, I think people see that. Like, he's a command pitcher, a finesse pitcher, and what strikes me fascinating about him is the difference between command and control. And he's walked a ton of guys. He walked a lot of guys in Rochester this year, if I'm not mistaken. And for a guy that I think has plus command, and that's partly because he doesn't have the pitches to get you out in the zone. He has to live on the margins, and he knows it. And so as poor as some of his outings have been, or maybe his track record, his higher level track record looks right now, I wouldn't give up on that guy, because he does it so smooth and easy potentially. And he's just got to figure it out, and lefties, got to figure it out. Now that being said, I'd take this guy as like a fourth starter going forward. I don't think he's going to be much more than that. But I do think if people are ready to bail on him, I'm in on him. And I think people, not just the scout people or performance people, but like the analytics people might look at those walks, because walks really, really scare them. But they don't see the potential plus command that those walks could really go down.
And you make good points about Gonsalves, Kimball. And I don't know if you saw him in A-ball or Double-A or in the spring, maybe before. He had shoulder issues going back to the Arizona Fall League a couple of years ago, and they carried into the next spring, and they cost him a month, and his velocity did drop. He lost a few ticks off the fastball, and I do wonder, a guy who had such a low walk rate in A-ball, in Double-A, he gets on the other side of that shoulder scare, where he even had to alter his mechanics a little bit, make sure he was driving off that back leg enough. He used to be 92, 93 on a good day, 91, 93. Now it's, like you say, 87, 89. That's Tommy Malone range, and you have to be able to dot the proverbial gnats behind, and he knows that. He has to be different. He has to pitch with an older mentality. I wouldn't put it past him either, though, because he's a smart kid. He's accountable. He does have good athlete, good body control, and just a question of, do the Twins feel like they saw enough there in that Major League audition? Was that just kind of a throw him a bone and see what you got and then move on, or a couple option years left for him, and maybe he gets on that shuttle and gets another chance in 19 and 20, et cetera. But a lot of people are rooting for that guy. I think we'll leave it there for now. It's been another fascinating conversation with Kimball Crossley, longtime professional scout, the most interesting man in the scouting world, trademark pending. And Kimball, we wish you all the best, and we hope that the next time we call you are unavailable because you're with your next employer. I think any team that listens to the last 45 minutes will have learned something, not just about you and certainly lesser about me, but about the game itself, because we touched on a lot of good topics, and I hope we'll do it again or not. But there's still a couple weeks left in the postseason, and all the best to you, and keep churning out those thoughts, and we'll be watching and listening. So thank you to Kimball Crossley again. It was great. Tom Schreier.
My pleasure.
All right. And Tom Schreier, of course, co-founder of ZoneCoverage.com, with us today, and of course Eric Foster on the controls and making sure that my terrible phone line stays active. Thank you to Eric. You've been listening to the Midwest Swing podcast. We're part of the Zone Coverage Podcast Network. You can subscribe via iTunes, Spotify, or any of your favorite podcast apps. We ask you to please leave a review, and I forgot to mention, positive reviews only. It's so simple. I'm your host, Mike Berardino. We'll see you in another week with a new topic here at Midwest Swing Podcast.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, thanks. That was great. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you, Kimball. All right. Talk to you later. See you guys.
Sounds good. Bye-bye.